Stephen Parker built his empire alone, brick by brick, boardroom by boardroom. To the world, he's a millionaire CEO. To himself, he's a man with no one left to come home to. That changes the day a 7-year-old girl named Chloe walks into his towering office with a handmade note. I make bracelets. I can knit. I don't make noise. I want to save my brother. At first, Stephen thinks it's a publicity stunt. But as Chloe calmly shares the heartbreaking truth, her brother dying in a public hospital and her family eating stale bread, Stephen is shaken. What begins as an unexpected visit soon unearths a forgotten past, a mysterious pendant, and a bond deeper than blood. What if this little girl holds the key to the life he lost? Stay with us to discover how a handmade bracelet, a promise, and a forgotten love might just change everything. Subscribe now to witness a story that will leave you breathless and remind you what really matters. Stephen Parker sat behind his glass-top desk, the morning sun slicing through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office like a quiet accusation. At 54, he had everything a man could want, at least on paper. His name headlined business magazines. His signature closed international deals. His company's stock had soared for 7 straight quarters. But the air around him felt hollow, like applause in an empty room. He was skimming a market analysis report when the soft knock came. His assistant poked her head in, brow furrowed with something just shy of disbelief. "Mr. Parker, there's a little girl out here asking to see you. Says it's urgent." Stephen blinked. "A girl?" "She's maybe 7 or 8. She walked here, alone, said she has something important. Wouldn't leave until you saw it." Stephen leaned back slowly. His mornings were surgically scheduled, investor calls, leadership briefings, endless strategies. Children didn't fit into that calculus. Still, something in the assistant's voice, hesitant but sincere, made him nod. "Send her in." The door opened fully, and in stepped the smallest person ever to stand in that towering office. She wore a faded hoodie 2 sizes too big and clutched a canvas tote that sagged under its own weight. Her shoes didn't match. But her eyes? Steady, clear, unshaken. She marched forward and placed a folded piece of notebook paper on his desk. Then she sat, legs dangling above the floor. Stephen hesitated, then unfolded the note. The words were printed in painstaking, oversized letters. I make bracelets. I can knit. I don't make noise. I want to save my brother. At the bottom, in smaller letters, please help. He looked up, startled. What's your name? Chloe, she replied, folding her hands in her lap with polite determination. My brother's name is Ryan. He's 13. He has something wrong with his heart, and the hospital says he needs a big surgery. We don't have the money. Stephen cleared his throat. Where are your parents? Gone, she answered simply. It's just me and Ryan now, and Miss Gerda. She lets us sleep in the room upstairs from her garage. I help her sweep. Stephen's jaw tightened. And how did you get here? Chloe pointed to a crumpled flyer poking out of her bag. His face was on it, one of his company's charity events from the local fairgrounds. You were smiling, she said, and it said you were kind. I figured maybe you'd listen. Stephen was quiet for a long moment. The weight of her presence, her dignity, her raw resolve, cut through every boardroom speech he'd heard this year. She reached into her tote and pulled out a tangled array of string bracelets, mismatched but lovingly made. I don't want a handout. I can work. I made these. I can make more. I'll knit or clean or whatever you need. Just, please, help my brother. Stephen slowly picked up one of the bracelets. Purple and white, uneven knots but tight. His chest ached in a place he hadn't felt in years. You said he's at the hospital now? She nodded. But not the fancy kind. The one that smells bad. His doctor says he doesn't have long unless they can do the surgery soon, but we don't even have bus money most days. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was sacred. Stephen wasn't thinking about spreadsheets anymore, or shareholders, or time zones. He was thinking about a girl too brave for her age, and a boy waiting in a hospital bed, maybe believing no one was coming. Chloe leaned forward, voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have to say yes. I just didn't know who else to ask." Stephen stood, slowly, like he was waking from a dream. "Chloe," he said gently, "do you think you could take me to see Ryan?" Her eyes widened. Then, cautiously, she nodded. "Now?" "Yes," Stephen replied, grabbing his coat and phone. "Right now." He didn't call his driver. He didn't alert his staff. He didn't even glance back at his desk. He just followed the little girl out to the glass doors, down the marble corridor, and into the unknown, toward a story he never imagined would rewrite the meaning of everything he thought he knew. The cab ride was quiet. Chloe sat beside Stephen in the back seat, her small hands clutched tightly around her tote like it was the most important thing in the world. Every so often, she'd glance up at him, as if to make sure he was still real, that the man from the flyer hadn't turned to smoke. Stephen watched the city blur past. He wasn't used to silence in transit. Usually, he took calls, replied to emails, barked orders through Bluetooth, but right now, all he could do was sit with the growing pressure in his chest. "You don't have to come all the way," Chloe murmured, barely audible over the hum of the engine. "If you're busy—" "I'm not," Stephen replied gently. "Not today." Chloe nodded slowly, then leaned her forehead against the window. "It's not a nice hospital, it's loud at night. The lady at the desk is mean sometimes, but the nurses are okay." Stephen felt something twist in him. He couldn't remember the last time a child had described survival like this, so calmly, like it was just the way the world worked. When they arrived, Chloe hopped out before the cab even fully stopped. She darted through the automatic doors, waving for him to follow. Stephen stepped out, took one look at the crumbling paint in the overcrowded lobby, and knew this place wasn't built for hope. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like they were tired of staying on. Chloe led him past waiting rooms packed with too many people and not enough chairs, down a hallway that smelled strongly of antiseptic and something else, something sadder. She stopped in front of a door marked Room 2B. "He's in here," she said softly, pulling out a crumpled visitor sticker from her pocket. "You can pretend to be my uncle if they ask. It's easier." Stephen stared at her for a beat too long. Then, gently, he placed his hand on her shoulder. "Let's go see your brother." They pushed open the door. The room was dim. An ancient TV buzzed in the corner, muted. Ryan lay in the bed, impossibly still. 13 years old, but he looked smaller under the worn hospital blankets. His face was pale, his lips tinged blue. Tubes ran from his arms. Machines beeped steadily beside him. "This is him," Chloe whispered, walking to the side of the bed. "He was fine last year. He even played soccer. But then he got really tired all the time. One day he fainted at school. They said it was his heart." Stephen approached slowly. He had walked through billion-dollar deal rooms with less hesitation. Chloe turned to him, her eyes wide and solemn. "I told him about you. I said you might come. That maybe you'd be different." Stephen swallowed, suddenly unsure what to do with his hands. He looked at Ryan's face, thin, fragile, familiar in some unspeakable way. "He can't talk," Chloe added, reaching into her tote again, "but he likes music, and soft voices. Sometimes I read to him, or just tell him what I see outside the window." Stephen pulled a nearby chair to the side of the bed. Slowly, he sat. Chloe opened her bag and placed the little note on the table next to Ryan's chart, the same note she had handed Stephen just hours ago. Seeing it there, beside the heart monitor, felt like something sacred. "I don't know anything about hospitals," Stephen admitted, his voice low. or sick kids, or this. That's okay, Chloe said, sitting cross-legged on the edge of the room's only other chair. Nobody does, until they have to. They sat in silence for a while, the kind that didn't feel awkward, just real. After a few minutes, Chloe rummaged through her bag and pulled out a plastic container filled with bracelets. She started sorting them quietly, placing the purple ones in one pile, the blue in another. Stephen watched her hands move. You said Ryan taught you how to make these? Chloe nodded. When Mom left, he said I needed something to do with my fingers so I wouldn't get sad. So he showed me how. Stephen didn't ask about the mother. The hurt in Chloe's voice said more than any detail ever could. Finally, he leaned forward, elbows on knees, and looked directly at her. I want to help. Her hands paused mid-sort. For real? Yes, he said with conviction. But not just with money. I want to meet the doctor. Understand what's happening. I want to be here. Chloe blinked, tears welling up behind her lashes. But she didn't cry. She just nodded and whispered, okay. Outside the window, the city moved on. Cars rushing, horns blaring, lives being lived in their regular rhythms. But inside room 2B, something had shifted. Something real had begun. Stephen Parker, CEO, billionaire, loner, had stepped into someone else's storm. And, for the first time in years, he didn't feel like a stranger in his own skin. Stephen returned the next morning before the sun had fully cleared the skyline, the cold of dawn biting at his suit jacket. He didn't know why he hadn't called first. Maybe because some part of him was afraid he'd find an empty bed, or that the whole experience the day before had been a vivid dream. But Chloe was there. Curled beside Ryan's hospital bed in a pink hoodie far too thin for the season, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees like she was holding herself together. Her head bobbed up as soon as he stepped through the door. You came back, she said with quiet disbelief, rubbing sleep from her eyes. I said I would, Stephen replied, gentler than he intended, and I brought breakfast, real breakfast. He held up a bag from the cafe 2 blocks away. Scrambled eggs, toast, and orange juice, all warm, all fresh. Chloe's face lit up with cautious delight, but she didn't move toward the bag. Can Ryan eat any of this? Stephen asked, eyeing the machine still tracking the boy's slow heartbeat. Not yet, Chloe said, but I think he smells it. His fingers twitched. They sat together in the room. Chloe perched on the window ledge as Stephen unfolded the food across the tiny table. Between bites, she told him about Ryan's favorite comic books, the blanket he wouldn't sleep without, the way he hated green beans with a vengeance. Her words were colored by fierce love, by tiny memories that only a sibling would know. Stephen found himself listening more deeply than he had in years. When a knock tapped on the door, it startled them both. A nurse poked her head in. Mr. Parker, the attending physician is doing rounds. She'll see you shortly. Chloe blinked. You talked to the doctor? Stephen nodded. I want to know everything. I want to know what he needs and how soon he can get it. She stared at him for a beat, the toast in her hand forgotten. Nobody's ever said that before. Everyone just says, we'll try. Stephen looked her directly in the eyes. We'll do more than try. 10 minutes later, Dr. Elaine Rowan walked in, a composed woman in her early 40s with tired eyes and a voice like velvet. She greeted Stephen professionally, but her glance shifted with gentle concern toward Chloe. I've read the case. Ryan's diagnosis is advanced cardiomyopathy. His heart's failing, and he'll need a transplant. Soon. Stephen swallowed. How soon? Realistically, weeks. We've placed him on the pediatric transplant list, but with his current status and financial history, it won't be easy. He's uninsured, and the old hospital— Forget the old hospital, Stephen interrupted. He's covered now. Whatever the best care is, he gets it. Money isn't the problem. Chloe's head snapped toward him, her mouth slightly agape. You mean it? I mean it, Stephen said, as though binding himself to the promise. Dr. Rowan gave a slow nod, her posture shifting ever so slightly. Then we'll begin the transfer process immediately. I'll reach out to St. Regis Children's Hospital. They have one of the best pediatric transplant units in the region. Stephen exhaled, the weight of the moment settling on him. Thank you. As the doctor left, Chloe stood beside him, her small hand brushing his sleeve. I've seen people make promises before, she whispered. They say it to be nice, to feel better. Stephen turned to face her, kneeling down so they were eye level. I'm not saying it to feel better, Chloe. I'm saying it because I've failed enough people in my life. I won't fail you and Ryan. There was silence between them, thick with unspoken things. Then Chloe reached into her tote and pulled out a small plastic bag. Inside were 3 bracelets, one red, one gold, one deep blue. I saved these for something special, she murmured. This one, she held up the blue one, means protection. That's for Ryan. The gold one means courage. That's for me. Stephen took the red one from her trembling hand. And this one? He asked softly. She looked up at him with the trust of someone who hadn't had many people to believe in. That one means hope. Stephen held the bracelet in his palm like it was made of diamonds. He didn't know if he could fix everything, but for the first time in years, he felt like he had found something real, something more valuable than anything his money had ever bought. He slipped the red bracelet onto his wrist, and for the first time, Chloe smiled without sadness. The ambulance ride from the county hospital to St. Regis Children's was quiet, except for the rhythmic beeping of Ryan's monitor. Stephen sat in the back with Chloe, the red bracelet she had given him still snug on his wrist, like a silent vow. Chloe clutched her brother's hand tightly, her legs swinging slightly off the stretcher bench. Every so often, she glanced up at Stephen, as if checking to see if he was still there, still real. He never looked away. When they arrived, the doors opened into a different world. The hospital smelled faintly of antiseptic and lemon polish, but everything gleamed. The polished floors, the cheerful walls, even the nurses' smiles felt warmer. A stuffed giraffe stood near the pediatric wing's entrance, and a mural of stars and planets adorned the ceiling. Do you think he'll like it here? Chloe asked softly. Stephen nodded, his voice hushed. He'll have the best, I promise. They were met by a team of pediatric specialists, cardiologists, nurses, and a child life counselor, who ushered Ryan into a private suite filled with light and soft beeping machines. A nurse began to hook him up to monitors with practiced calm, speaking gently to Chloe as she explained what each machine did. Stephen stood just inside the door, feeling both helpless and essential. You can sit beside him, one nurse said to Chloe, motioning to the cushioned recliner. She climbed in, folding her legs beneath her, and reached for her brother's hand again. Ryan's face remained pale, his breathing shallow, but the flicker of calm across Chloe's brow was unmistakable. Stephen turned to the lead physician, Dr. Mirza, a tall man with kind eyes and a steady voice. Do we have a timeline? Stephen asked quietly, watching Chloe stroke her brother's hand. We've placed Ryan on the priority transplant list, but we'll also begin an aggressive treatment plan in the meantime. Stabilization is key. Our first goal is to build his strength. You've given him the best chance possible. Stephen nodded, absorbing every word. He'll have whatever he needs. Dr. Mirza looked at him for a moment longer, as if trying to understand the man standing before him. You care about them deeply, don't you? Stephen glanced at Chloe, then Ryan. More than I ever expected to care about anything. After the doctor left, Stephen stepped outside the room to make a call. His assistant answered immediately. Yes, Mr. Parker? Cancel the London trip. Push the board meeting to next week. and make a donation to St. Regis quietly under the Chloe Initiative. Use that name." There was a pause. "Is Chloe?" "She's a reminder," Stephen said, his voice tighter than he intended. "A reminder of what matters." He hung up and turned to see Chloe standing in the doorway, watching him with an expression far too serious for her age. "Are we going to stay here a long time?" she asked. "If that's what Ryan needs, yes." Chloe looked at the hospital corridor, then back at Stephen. "Then I'll need my yarn. I left it in our old room." "I'll get it for you." Her eyes widened. "Really?" Stephen crouched beside her. "I made a promise, remember? And I don't break those." She bit her lip, then surprised him with a quick hug around the neck. It was awkward and sudden, but utterly sincere. "Thank you." The next morning, Stephen returned with not only her yarn, but a small rolling cart filled with colorful beads, new thread, and every type of bracelet cord the store had in stock. Chloe's eyes lit up like Christmas morning, and for the first time in days, she laughed. Really laughed. Ryan's condition remained fragile, but the doctors were hopeful. Chloe spent hours beside him, crafting bracelets, whispering stories, sometimes singing quietly. And Stephen stayed. He didn't go back to his penthouse. He didn't take meetings unless absolutely necessary. He started sleeping in a recliner outside the kids' suite, his schedule built around medication times and doctor rounds. At night, he'd sit with Chloe talking about silly things, her favorite colors, the way Ryan used to build pillow forts, how her mom used to braid her hair before she passed. In those moments, Stephen felt something stir in his chest that had long been buried. Connection. One night, Chloe leaned her head against his arm. "Do you think people get better faster when they know someone's waiting for them?" Stephen looked down at her, his throat tightening. "I think it helps. I think love makes a difference." She nodded solemnly. "Then Ryan's going to get better, because we're waiting." Stephen had seen hundreds of hospital rooms in his lifetime, during charity events, ribbon cuttings, and press tours, but none had ever felt like this. None had felt personal. Here, the walls were alive with the hope Chloe carried. The silence was filled not with dread, but quiet courage. It was late afternoon when she pulled something from the front pocket of her frayed backpack. She had been sitting cross-legged at the foot of Ryan's bed, threading beads into a new bracelet, her small hands calm, precise. With care, she untangled the thin silver chain and held it out toward Stephen. "I want to leave this with him," she said, brushing the tarnished charm with her thumb, "so he knows I'm always close, even when he sleeps." Stephen leaned in to take it gently. The pendant was oval, no larger than a bottle cap, with a faded rose pressed under glass on one side. The other held a small, time-worn engraving, "To my heart, forever, S." His breath caught. He knew this pendant. It wasn't just familiar, it was hauntingly specific. Years ago, he had commissioned 2 identical pieces like this, handcrafted by a jeweler in Italy. One for himself, one for the woman he was supposed to marry, the woman he'd lost. Stephen's voice barely came. Where did you get this?" Chloe looked up. "It was my mom's. She wore it every day until the accident. After that, I kept it safe. It's our lucky charm now." He stared at her, the name echoing in his ears. Her mom. And suddenly, a fog began to lift in his mind. "Chloe," he said quietly, "what was your mother's name?" "Isabel," she answered without hesitation. "Isabel Hart." The room spun. Isabel. Izzy. It had been over a decade. The woman with the fire in her eyes and a voice that always softened when she spoke of hope. They'd met before his company's rise, before he became who he was now. She had been an artist, vibrant and endlessly giving. They were inseparable until tragedy struck. She vanished after a terrible car accident, and he'd been told she didn't survive. He never attended the funeral. couldn't bring himself to face it. Her parents had refused his calls. Eventually, he accepted what he was told, that the love of his life was gone. But now, Chloe's face, those eyes, that pendant. Stephen stood up abruptly, his hand trembling as he returned the pendant to Chloe. "I think," he said carefully, "that your mother meant something to me, a long time ago." Chloe's eyes widened, but she didn't speak. She clutched the necklace, a frown forming as her young mind tried to fit puzzle pieces that didn't quite make sense. "Why didn't you come for us?" she asked, not accusing, just genuinely confused. Stephen swallowed hard. "Because I didn't know you existed. I didn't even know your mom. Survived that night." Chloe looked at him, trying to understand a lifetime of pain in a single moment. Then she nodded solemnly, as if acknowledging that grown-up things were sometimes too big to explain. "You're here now," she said, returning her attention to Ryan and gently tucking the pendant beneath his blanket. Stephen turned to the window, the view of the city now a blur. He saw flashes, Isabel painting in his old loft, laughter echoing during Sunday walks in the park, her reading aloud from worn poetry books. She had believed in things he didn't understand back then. Family, redemption, forgiveness. He had mourned her for 10 years, built his empire around the hollow ache her absence left. And now she lived on, in the little girl arranging beads with the wisdom of someone far older than 7, in the boy fighting for his life with her quiet defiance. Stephen left the room and walked until he found himself outside, the early evening sun painting gold streaks on the pavement. He inhaled sharply. The past was no longer buried. It was alive, breathing, sleeping down the hall with a pendant on his chest. He returned with resolve. Back in the room, Chloe had fallen asleep curled in the armchair, a blanket tucked around her shoulders. Stephen quietly sat beside Ryan, his expression softening. "You don't know me yet," he whispered, brushing a hand through the boy's hair, "but I promise you, Ryan, I'll never disappear again." Morning sunlight filtered through the hospital blinds, casting soft bands of gold across Ryan's bed. The room was quiet, save for the steady beeping of monitors and the occasional stir of nurses just beyond the door. Chloe was still asleep in the corner chair, curled up like a cat, her arms wrapped around her backpack. Stephen sat upright beside Ryan's bed, his suit jacket draped over the back of a chair. His tie was loosened, the first few buttons of his shirt undone. For the first time in years, he looked less like the untouchable CEO and more like a man stripped down to something raw and real. Ryan stirred faintly. His eyes fluttered, but he didn't wake. Stephen watched him silently for a long time, still trying to process the truth he had refused to believe for so long. These weren't just 2 children he had stumbled upon. They were part of Isabel, part of a life he'd been denied, and now that he knew, there was no turning away. He stood and stepped into the hallway, signaling a nurse who had just walked past. "Is the attending physician available?" he asked, his voice firm but polite. "Dr. Mason. She should be finishing rounds soon," the nurse replied. "Do you want me to page her?" "Please," Stephen said. He didn't wait long. Minutes later, Dr. Eleanor Mason approached, clipboard in hand, her expression calm but curious. She was a woman in her late 40s with wise eyes and a no-nonsense posture. "Mr. Parker," she greeted. "You're the one who transferred Ryan to our care?" "Yes, I need to know everything, what he's facing and what he needs." Dr. Mason led him back into the room, glancing at Chloe before speaking in a hushed tone. "Ryan has a congenital heart defect, tetralogy of Fallot, to be specific. It's serious but not hopeless. With surgery and post-op care, he has a strong chance of leading a normal life." "And the timeline?" Stephen asked, heart tight. "We'll need to stabilize him a bit more, do another round of imaging. But ideally, surgery within the next 10 days. Stephen nodded, then glanced at Chloe, who was beginning to stir. "Schedule it. Whatever it takes. Money, personnel, resources. I'll cover everything." Dr. Mason didn't mask her surprise. "That's incredibly generous." "It's not generosity," Stephen replied quietly. "It's the beginning of something I should have done a long time ago." The moment Dr. Mason left, Chloe blinked sleepily and sat up, rubbing her eyes. "Is it morning?" Stephen smiled gently. "It is. You slept well." She nodded and moved quickly to Ryan's side, brushing a strand of hair off his forehead. "Is he better?" "He's stable," Stephen said, kneeling beside her. "They're going to help him. The best doctors are working on a plan." Chloe looked up at him, her eyes so serious it was jarring. "Will it work?" Stephen didn't answer right away. He placed a hand over hers, steady and warm. "I'm going to do everything in my power, Chloe. I promise." She studied him for a moment. "You're not just helping because of the pendant, are you?" His breath hitched. She was sharp, too sharp for someone so young. "No," he said, voice cracking slightly. "I'm helping because I should have been there a long time ago. Because your mom, she was everything to me." Chloe nodded slowly, then whispered, "She used to cry when she thought we were asleep, but she always said good things about you." Stephen closed his eyes against the sting in his chest. The guilt. The years lost. "I never got to say goodbye," he whispered. Chloe squeezed his hand. "Maybe now you can say hello instead." Later that day, Stephen made calls, real ones. He reached out to an old friend who specialized in guardianship law. He requested paperwork, background checks, the full procedure. He didn't know what the future would bring, but he was ready to start laying bricks for it. He also called his assistant. "I'm taking a leave of absence." There was a stunned silence on the other end. "Sir? Delegate all non-critical operations. And if the board has a problem with that, tell them it's personal. Deeply personal." "Yes, Mr. Parker." As the day wore on, Stephen stayed with the children. He helped Chloe color in her notebook. He talked to Ryan's nurse. He brought snacks from the cafeteria, though Chloe wrinkled her nose at the soggy sandwich. By sunset, he had found a rhythm he didn't know he'd been missing. One filled with simple things, human things. No acquisitions, no boardrooms, just a sick boy, a brave girl, and a man finally understanding what love meant when it asked for something more than success. That night, as Stephen gently tucked Chloe into the hospital couch with a soft blanket, she looked up and whispered, "Will you still be here in the morning?" Stephen placed his hand over her tiny one. "I'll be here every morning, Chloe." The rain had turned to mist by the time morning light seeped through the hospital room's curtains, soft and silver. The rhythmic beep of monitors continued their steady vigil over Ryan, while Chloe lay curled beneath her blanket on the couch, her brow furrowed in sleep. Stephen had barely moved all night. He sat in the same chair, elbows resting on his knees, fingers loosely clasped in front of him. His eyes remained locked on Ryan's pale face. Every flicker of a finger, every shift in breath made Stephen lean forward, hoping, aching, for movement, for awareness. He'd faced shareholders who could strip him of power with a single vote. He'd held the fate of billion-dollar mergers in his hands. But none of it, nothing, had ever made his heart clench the way waiting for this boy to wake up did. A nurse entered quietly to check vitals, giving Stephen a small nod of recognition before going about her tasks. When she adjusted Ryan's IV line, his fingers twitched. Stephen leaned in. "Did you see that?" he whispered. The nurse glanced over, surprised. "I think, yes." She moved to the bedside, gently calling Ryan's name. A slow flutter of eyelids. "Ryan," she said softly, "can you hear me?" Chloe stirred on the couch, blinking awake. Her eyes widened the moment she saw movement in her brother's bed. Stephen stood, heart thudding in his chest. "Come on, kid," he whispered. Ryan's eyelids lifted, revealing unfocused eyes that slowly scanned the room. His chest rose and fell more intentionally now, breath catching as he tried to speak. "Water," he rasped. The nurse helped him sip from a straw, then nodded with encouragement. "That's good, Ryan. You're doing great." Chloe had already darted to his side, tears springing to her eyes. "Ryan! It's me! I'm here!" His gaze found hers. He smiled faintly. "Hey, Peanut." Chloe let out a laugh that sounded half choked, half overjoyed. "You remember!" Ryan turned his head slightly and caught sight of Stephen. His brows knit together in confusion. "This is Mr. Parker," Chloe said, her voice trembling. "He helped you. He's helping us." Ryan blinked, studying the man who stood tall and still, his face soft with emotion. "You're—" "The one from the fair posters," Ryan murmured. Stephen nodded. "That's me, but you can call me Stephen, or whatever you like." Ryan tried to sit up, but the nurse gently urged him to relax. "Not yet, champ. You need rest." Stephen cleared his throat and stepped closer. "I know you have a lot of questions, and we'll get to them. But right now, just focus on healing, okay?" Ryan's gaze didn't waver. "Are you gonna leave?" The words landed like a punch. Stephen shook his head, voice low and sincere. "No, I'm not going anywhere, I promise." Chloe wrapped her arms around her brother, whispering to him in a flurry of relief. Stephen turned away to give them privacy, his heart thudding with something unfamiliar, something like hope. Later, when Ryan drifted off again, Dr. Mason entered to check on him. After reviewing his vitals and test results, she offered a cautiously optimistic smile. "He's stable. We'll proceed with final pre-op assessments. If all goes well, we can schedule surgery in 2 days." Stephen exhaled, as if releasing a breath he'd been holding for a decade. In the hallway, Chloe tugged on his sleeve. "He's gonna be okay?" Stephen crouched beside her. "Yeah, kiddo. He's got a good team, and he's strong, just like his sister." She smiled shyly, then reached into her backpack and pulled out a thin bracelet made of sky blue thread and wooden beads. "I made this last night. I was scared, so I kept my hands busy." Stephen took it with reverent fingers. "It's beautiful." "It's for you," she said, brushing her bangs behind her ear, "so you don't forget." He stared at it for a long moment before slipping it on. "I won't forget. Not ever." That evening, Stephen stepped outside for air, the city humming around him. He dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "Hello?" A woman's voice answered. "Grace, it's Stephen." There was silence. Then, "Stephen Parker. This is a surprise." "I need your help," he said. "It's about a boy named Ryan and a girl named Chloe. And I think they're part of a life I lost when I lost your sister." There was another pause, longer this time. "Tell me everything," she finally said. And he did. The sun filtered gently through the wide hospital windows the following afternoon, painting everything in a warm gold glow. For the first time in days, laughter, soft and cautious, filled Ryan's room. Chloe was perched on the edge of Ryan's bed, her legs swinging rhythmically as she retold the story of how she'd marched into Stephen's office. Ryan grinned at the image, still too weak to do more than chuckle. Stephen sat nearby, listening with quiet amusement, the bracelet Chloe had made still proudly around his wrist. "I had a whole speech planned," Chloe said proudly, then admitted, "but I forgot most of it." "You didn't need a speech," Stephen replied warmly. "You walked in and changed everything." Chloe beamed. Just then, a knock on the door interrupted them. A nurse stepped in holding a small package. "This arrived for Mr. Parker, but addressed care of Chloe and Ryan," she said, handing it to Stephen. Curious, Stephen opened the padded envelope and found inside a delicate silver locket, tarnished with age but carefully polished. His breath caught. He turned the locket over and traced the tiny, familiar engraving on the back, All my heart, always, L. He knew that inscription. He had given this locket, this exact one, to Lily, his fiancée, almost 20 years ago. The locket had vanished with her. His voice dropped to a whisper. Where did this come from? Chloe frowned. That's mine. Well, it was my mom's. I wear it sometimes, but it broke, so I left it in my bag while we were here. Stephen's hands trembled slightly. Do you know where your mom got it? Chloe tilted her head. It was always hers. She said it was the only thing she kept from before everything changed. Everything in the Stephen's chest tightened. What was your mom's full name? Lily Anderson, Chloe replied quietly, sensing the shift in the room's mood. Stephen's mind reeled. Lily Anderson. His Lily. Gone for years, presumed missing after a tragic accident on a volunteer mission abroad. Her body never found. Everyone had moved on eventually. Everyone but him. He felt the chair sway beneath him as he sat down. Your mom. Was she ever in California? Before Atlanta? Chloe nodded. She said she used to live near the beach. She loved the ocean. Stephen looked over at Ryan, whose eyes were locked on him now with dawning understanding. Ryan, Stephen said, his voice thick. Do you remember your mom ever talking about someone named Stephen? Ryan hesitated. Yeah, but she always said it soft, like it hurt. Stephen felt the wind knocked from him. Chloe's voice wavered. Was she someone important to you? She was everything, Stephen whispered, and I thought I lost her forever. For a long moment, silence pressed heavy in the room. Ryan looked over at his sister, then back at Stephen. You loved her? With every part of me, Stephen said, voice breaking. We were going to build a life together. Then she left for a humanitarian trip, and she never came back. Everyone said she'd died. I searched for months, but... Chloe leaned into Ryan, her eyes suddenly wet. That's why the locket's the same, she whispered. Stephen stood, walking to the window, trying to process the impossible. She survived, he muttered. Somehow. She survived. She had you, and she didn't come back to me. Ryan's voice was calm but firm. She said she lost everything in the storm. No ID, no phone. She was sick for months. By the time she got better, she thought you wouldn't want her anymore. Stephen turned, the weight of his own assumptions slamming into him. I never stopped wanting her, he said hoarsely. Not one day. Chloe walked over and held out the locket. She gave this to me before she got sick again. She said it belonged to someone who made her believe in love. Stephen took it, closing his hand around the pendant with reverent care. I'll fix it, he whispered. I'll fix everything. Later, as the siblings drifted to sleep under the watchful hum of monitors, Stephen stepped into the hallway, calling a number he hadn't dialed in years. Grace, he said when the line picked up. There's something you need to know. Lily. She's alive, and I think she had my children. There was stunned silence, then a sharp inhale. Tell me where you are, Grace said. The hospital corridor had quieted, the earlier hum of a staff and visitors now reduced to the gentle beeping of monitors and the soft shuffling of nurses at their stations. Stephen leaned against the wall just outside Ryan's room, the weight of the silver locket still heavy in his pocket and heavier on his heart. His conversation with Grace had ended an hour ago, but her words still echoed in his ears. I always suspected she made it out, but no one believed me. You found her children, Stephen. You found her story. Now, as he paced slowly down the hall, the door to Lily's past was no longer just cracked open. It had been blown wide by truth. He returned to the room, drawn by the soft sound of Chloe's voice. She was whispering to Ryan, her head resting gently on his shoulder. They both looked up as Stephen stepped in. You okay? Ryan asked quietly. Stephen nodded, though the storm inside him raged. Yeah. Just had to make a call. To someone who knew our mom? Chloe asked, already guessing more than he'd expected. Yes, Stephen admitted, pulling a chair close. Her name's Grace. She was your mom's best friend. Like a sister to her. She's coming tomorrow. Chloe's eyes lit up, a little glimmer of excitement piercing the veil of exhaustion. Really? Mom talked about her sometimes. Stephen smiled faintly. She talked about a lot of things, I bet. More than I ever heard. Ryan shifted slightly. If you knew Mom, back then, why didn't you come find us? Stephen exhaled deeply. Because I thought she was gone. Everyone did. There was a rescue report, no survivors. I didn't even get a goodbye. The silence that followed was sympathetic, but strained. The kind of silence where shared pain floats between people trying to understand each other through grief that time never erased. But she never stopped loving you, Chloe said softly. She had your picture in her drawer. Always. Stephen's throat tightened. And I never stopped loving her. He broke off, shaking his head. I just wish she'd come back. She tried, Ryan said simply, but life got in the way. The next morning, Stephen arrived early with fresh coffee, donuts, and the kind of nervous energy that made him fidget with the hospital room's blinds. Chloe and Ryan were more alert, energized by a good night's sleep and maybe the realization that their lives were no longer a drifting question mark. At 10:12 a.m., Grace arrived. Her hair was grayer, her posture stiffer than Stephen remembered, but her presence still commanded attention. The moment she entered the room and saw Chloe, her hand flew to her mouth. She has Lily's eyes, Grace whispered. And her heart, Stephen added quietly. Chloe stood and approached her. You knew my mom? Grace's face folded in on itself, tears coming instantly. Oh, honey, your mom was like my sister. I never stopped missing her. Chloe wrapped her arms around Grace's waist, and Grace knelt, hugging her like she'd waited a decade for it. Ryan watched quietly, his expression still skeptical, but softening. Once they were seated, Stephen brought out the box, the one with Lily's letters and journals Grace had mailed him years ago, unopened. He hadn't been ready to face them then. Now, he was. As he read the pages aloud, the room grew still. The ink carried Lily's voice across time. If this ever reaches you, Stephen, and you're reading it, I survived, but I wasn't the same. I couldn't be. I had children growing inside me and no home to return to. I was scared you'd see me as broken. I was scared I couldn't be the woman you remembered. Stephen's hands trembled. Chloe clutched Ryan's hand tightly. Grace dabbed her eyes. She wrote you every year. I mailed them all, but you never wrote back. I never got them, Stephen said hoarsely. They never reached me. Someone must have kept them from me. He was right. That evening, back at his penthouse, Stephen dug through an old safe, one Lily had gifted him when they first got engaged. In the very back, sealed in a dusty envelope marked with a familiar company logo, were every letter, unopened, untouched. The truth was cruel and undeniable. His old executive assistant, once trying to protect him, had intercepted them. Believing Lily's disappearance had nearly destroyed Stephen, she'd made a choice she thought was kind. It wasn't. Stephen stared at the pile for a long time before pulling out one and reading it beneath the soft lamplight. The twins will never know their father unless you come. But if you choose not to, I'll still tell them you were good, that you mattered. The next morning, he made a decision. At the hospital, he knelt beside Chloe and Ryan's beds. Your mom wanted you to know you were loved, every single day, and I want you to know you're not alone anymore. Ryan's voice cracked. Does that mean you'll stay? Stephen reached for their hands. If you'll let me. I'd like to try being the dad she believed I could be. Chloe leaned into him, whispering against his shoulder. She'd be happy. As Stephen held the twins close, the image of Lily standing at the edge of an ocean filled his mind, smiling, peaceful, whole. He had lost her once. He wouldn't lose them now. David had always believed he was the kind of man who could handle pressure. Decades of executive decisions, market crashes, logistical nightmares, he'd weathered them all with calm resolve. But nothing had prepared him for the weight of hearing Liam whisper through tears, "Uncle says we should live with him. He says you don't know how to be a real dad." The words had been spoken without malice, just quiet confusion, the kind that slices deeper than anger ever could. David sat motionless in his study, the legal papers from Rachel's brother scattered across the desk. "Petition for guardianship," it read. His own name printed like a stranger's, David Monroe, respondent. Across the living room, Liam and Lucas sat huddled together on the couch, coloring silently, unaware of the storm gathering around them. Rachel's brother, Kevin Adams, had filed the suit 2 days earlier. A man David had met briefly once at Rachel's funeral. His face had been a mirror of old resentment. Now, Kevin stood claiming that David had no right to the boys, that he was a stranger who'd only shown up when the hard part was over. David knew Kevin wasn't entirely wrong. He hadn't been there when the twins were born, hadn't rocked them to sleep or read them stories about knights and dragons. He hadn't been the one Rachel leaned on through midnight fevers or scraped knees. That truth haunted him every time one of the boys called him Mr. David instead of Dad. But it didn't make Kevin right either. He rose, crossing the room to kneel in front of Liam and Lucas. "Boys," he began gently, "can we talk?" Liam nodded slowly. Lucas looked up, his expression wary but trusting. "You know your Uncle Kevin wants you to live with him, right?" David asked. Lucas's lip quivered. "But we're already home." David swallowed hard. "I want you to stay, more than anything. But we might have to explain that to a judge soon." "Like court?" Liam asked, eyes widening. "Yes," David said softly. "Like court, but I'll be there. Every minute, I promise." Later that night, after the boys had fallen asleep clutching the worn teddy bears they'd brought from the hospital, David sat alone with Rachel's journal, his hands trembling slightly as he turned the pages. He'd discovered it tucked between picture books in the small bookcase beside her hospital bed. Inside were months of entries written in Rachel's neat, slanted handwriting. He stopped at a page marked with a faded hospital bracelet. "If you ever find this, David, I hope you'll forgive yourself. I never hated you for leaving. I only wished you'd come back before it was too late. But if you're here now, with them, please don't let them grow up wondering if they were enough. They are. They always were." Tears blurred the ink as he read the words aloud. His voice broke somewhere in the middle. He hadn't come back in time to save Rachel, but maybe, just maybe, he could keep her last wish alive. The next morning, dressed in a modest gray suit and holding the journal like a shield, David stepped into the courtroom. Across the aisle sat Kevin, stiff in a blazer, his lawyer whispering in his ear. The hearing began with formalities, but David barely heard them. His heart pounded as Kevin's attorney listed his supposed failures, his absence, his lack of parenting experience, his bachelor lifestyle. Then it was David's turn. He stood slowly. "Your Honor," he said, voice steady, "I won't pretend I've always been there for Liam and Lucas. I failed Rachel. I didn't fight for her when I should have, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. But I am here now, and I'm not leaving." He paused, holding up the journal. "This is Rachel's. She wrote this for me, for them. In it, she asks me to stay, to forgive myself, to give these boys a life filled with love, not perfection, just presence." He turned toward Kevin. I know you love them. I don't doubt that. But I'm not trying to replace anyone. I'm just trying to honor the only woman I've ever truly loved, and be the father I should have been from the beginning. The courtroom fell silent. The judge glanced at the social worker's report, then back to the boys, who sat at the back, holding hands, wide-eyed but calm. Her voice was quiet. I believe the best interest of the children is to remain with Mr. Monroe. Petition denied. A slow exhale left David's lungs as if a decade's worth of weight had lifted all at once. He turned to see Liam whisper something to Lucas, who then leapt from his seat and sprinted down the aisle into David's arms. You didn't let us go, Lucas said, burying his face in David's neck. Never, David whispered, holding them both as tightly as he could. Never again. The courtroom was still, heavy with tension and anticipation. David sat at the edge of the witness stand, his hands folded but tight with nervous energy. Across from him sat Rachel's brother, Thomas Adams, a man David had not seen in over a decade. Thomas's eyes were sharp, unforgiving, and he carried the weight of years of resentment like a second skin. I'm not here because I want to tear them away, Thomas said firmly, his voice resonating in the wood-paneled room. I'm here because someone has to think about what's best for Liam and Lucas. They deserve stability. They deserve family. David breathed slowly, gripping the edge of the table. He had rehearsed what he would say 100 times. None of it felt right now. None of it felt like enough. The judge, a woman with graying hair and a tired expression, looked toward David. Mr. Monroe, please continue. He stood, carefully unbuttoning his blazer. Your Honor, I wasn't there when my sons were born. I didn't know they existed. That's not an excuse, just the truth. I left Rachel because I was a coward, because I let fear and my family's judgment make decisions I should have fought against. I've regretted it every day since. Thomas shifted in his seat, scoffing softly. David glanced over, then pulled a folded sheet of paper from his inside pocket. This is a letter Rachel wrote. She left it in a notebook beside her hospital bed. I didn't open it until last night. I couldn't. I was afraid of what she might say. He unfolded the page slowly. His voice trembled as he read, If David ever finds this, if you're reading it now, I hope you've forgiven yourself. I already have. You were young, and I was stubborn. I didn't tell you I was pregnant at first because I wasn't sure I could carry them to term. But they made it, and they are everything good I've ever done. If you've come back, then promise me you'll stay. Not just for them, for you. You still have a chance to be the man I always knew you could be. A silence blanketed the room, the kind that clings to breath. David exhaled shakily and looked up. Your Honor, I'm not asking to replace anyone. I'm asking to be their father, because I love them, because they've changed me, and because I won't walk away again. Liam and Lucas sat on the bench behind him, their small hands nervously clasped together. Lucas leaned into his brother's shoulder, whispering something that made Liam smile faintly. The judge finally spoke, measured but warm. Mr. Adams, do you have any response? Thomas rose slowly. Rachel was my sister. She deserved better than what David gave her back then, but I've seen him with the boys, and I've seen how they look at him. Rachel wanted him to have this chance. He paused. And maybe, so do I. A wave of relief swept through David so quickly it almost knocked him backward. The judge nodded. Then I will grant joint guardianship to Mr. Monroe, with primary custody pending a 3-month observation period. Court is adjourned. The gavel fell, and David turned to see his sons rush forward. Liam hugged him tightly, whispering, Did we win? David knelt, his voice thick. We didn't win, buddy. We just finally got to start. Lucas wrapped his arms around David's neck. Can we go home now? David smiled through tears. Yeah, son, let's go home. The late autumn sun poured golden light through the kitchen windows, casting long shadows over the breakfast table where Liam and Lucas sat with their crayons and cereal bowls. The house was quiet, except for the soft rustle of paper and the occasional clink of a spoon against ceramic. David stood at the stove, awkwardly flipping pancakes, burning the edges slightly, but trying with all his heart. He wasn't sure when this domestic chaos had become his peace, but it had. Every spilled glass of milk, every Lego underfoot, every night Liam asked for one more story. He cherished it all, because it was real, because it was theirs. "Dad," Lucas said, mouthful of cereal, "can we hang the poster now?" David turned, slightly startled, still not used to hearing that word from their lips. "Yeah," Liam chimed in, jumping down from his chair. "It's ready. We finished it last night when you fell asleep on the couch." David wiped his hands on a towel and followed them into the living room, where a large piece of paper lay across the coffee table. It was covered in bright, uneven handwriting and colorful drawings. In the center were 3 stick figures labeled Dad, Liam, and Lucas. Above them, floating in the clouds, was a 4th figure with a kind smile and the long hair. Mom was written beneath it in careful, curly letters. At the top, in bold crayon strokes, the title read, Our Family. David sank to his knees. His throat tightened, and for a long moment he couldn't speak. The boys watched him anxiously. "Do you like it?" Liam asked quietly. David reached out, tracing the lines with his fingers. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "It's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." Lucas pointed to the figure in the sky. "She's always watching us. That's what Miss Ellen said at the hospital." "She is," David said, his voice husky with emotion. "And I think she'd be really proud of you. Of both of you." The boys beamed. They helped him tape the poster to the wall above the couch, standing on tiptoes and stepping back to admire their work. When it was finally centered, David stepped back and took a photo, something to hold on to when the noise and joy of childhood faded into memory. That night, he tucked them into bed, Lucas with his favorite stuffed turtle and Liam with the well-worn copy of The Little Prince. They talked about school projects and lunchbox ideas and what kind of dog they might get one day. When the lights were off, David lingered in the doorway, watching their silhouettes against the soft glow of the nightlight. "I love you," he said softly. It felt so natural now. "Love you too," came 2 sleepy voices in unison. Downstairs, he sat alone in the living room, the warmth of the day still lingering. On the wall, the poster fluttered slightly in the draft, and he reached up to smooth it down. His phone buzzed. A message from his assistant. "The board approved the restructure. Remote schedule finalized. You're all set to work from home." David smiled. The Empire could wait. Instead, he opened the browser and clicked Submit on the final paperwork to launch the Rachel Hope Foundation, a nonprofit providing emergency medical funds for single parents in crisis. The mission was simple. No parent should ever face what Rachel did, alone, scared, without help. A week later, under a maple tree in the local park, a dedication ceremony was held. Friends, former colleagues, doctors who had cared for Rachel, and even neighbors gathered. David stood at the podium with Liam on one side and Lucas on the other, holding their hands. "This park was Rachel's favorite," he began, his voice steady. "She used to come here and dream about giving her sons the childhood she never had. Today, we honor that dream and promise to carry it forward." After the applause, David sat on the grass with the boys. Lucas leaned against him, eyes heavy with sleep. "Dad," Liam whispered, "are we going to be okay?" David wrapped his arms around them both, pulling them close. "We already are," he said gently. "We already are."